I'm Joe. I was 8 when my parents and I were in a major car accident. My parents died and I suffered a traumatic brain injury. I mostly recovered, but something inside me, however, was different. I seemed to have lost my conscience or the ability to feel guilt. I was raised by my father's brother and his wife. They had no children of their own and devoted their lives and love to me. My aunt tried to explain how the brain injury affected my feelings and behavior and that I had to be on my guard not to give in to violence or meanness. They didn't shower me with money, but with all the love two people could possibly give a child. They were the two sweetest, kindest, most loving people on earth. When I was 13 and had my appendix removed, they took turns staying up all night with me in the hospital and for the next few days at home. That's the kind of love that money can't buy. I suppose that was the most important lesson they could have ever taught me. Money can't buy love, and love will always trump money. They drove Toyota Camrys, not expensive sports cars. No one would have confused us with rich people. I certainly never did, but we were comfortable and had everything we needed. We lived in a 3,000 square foot house. It wasn't a mansion. It was just a nice big house in an upper middle class neighborhood where the local kids felt at home playing the newest and unreleased video games that my uncle brought home from work. In return, we had to answer questions about the games to the market research team that my uncle brought home to interview us all. On the last day of school in June, where I was the smallest kid in 7th grade, Eric, the biggest kid, demanded my lunch money. He was holding hands with Susan, who before that day had been my girlfriend. I refused, and he beat the crap out of me for a good 10 minutes. Susan laughed at me. I was black and blue, limping and in pain for more than a week from the beating. My aunt took me to the hospital and phoned the police. The police took my statement. The next day, they told my parents that according to Eric and Susan, I fell down a flight of stairs and was just jealous of Eric and wanted to get him in trouble. The police lost interest and nothing happened after that. I learned not to rely on the police to solve my problems. My uncle insisted that a man has to learn to defend himself and fight his own battles if he wanted to keep his self-respect. I spent the summer swimming laps every morning and going to a boxing and weightlifting gym every afternoon. I was the only kid there. Everyone else was a present or former prize fighter. By the end of the first week, I was black and blue all over. By the end of the summer, I had great stamina, knew how to box with the best of them, and had added over 10 pounds of new muscles to back myself up. In September, I was actually looking forward to again seeing Eric. Walking home after school on the first school day, he cornered me and demanded my money. I pretended to be afraid. As he leaned in to steal my wallet from my pocket, I hit him in his nose with a strong right hook. He looked at me stunned. Blood dripped from his broken nose as my left fist tore into his stomach. I couldn't stop myself and kept hitting him until he fell to the ground and begged me to stop while he picked up 2 of his teeth from the cement. I was in such good shape that I wasn't even winded. I was so amped up that it took all the self-control I could muster not to kill him, as I could hear my aunt's voice in my head begging me to stop. Believe me, I was physically and emotionally capable of killing him. I felt no guilt or sorrow. I warned Eric to tell his parents and police that now he had fallen down a flight of stairs. If the police bothered me, I would come back to Eric and finish the job. No one would ever again make me a victim. If they tried, they would suffer the consequences. The next day in school, Susan tried to make up with me. I laughed in her face and told her to go and kiss her toothless boyfriend. She called me a psycho and ran away. She might have been right. I don't seem to have a conscience or feel guilt, but my aunt convinced me to never be the first to harm someone. However, if they first harmed me, I threw the rule book out of the window. When my aunt and uncle met and fell in love, he was employee number 8 and his wife was employee number 10 in what is now one of the world's largest software companies. They were frugal, unassuming people who lived within their modest salaries. Their salaries weren't extravagant, but the value of their stock options was astronomical. As a teenager, I learned that they were the 99th wealthiest couple in the United States, based on their stock holdings. They were also the happiest couple I'd ever met. I once asked them why they didn't buy a yacht or multiple vacation homes. My aunt explained that if they thought that buying yachts and jets would bring them more happiness, then they would buy them. Instead, they made many generous and anonymous contributions to a lot of charities and people in need. Whenever the local TV station ran a story about a family struggling with hospital bills for a sick child, my aunt and uncle would anonymously pay their bills. Helping other people brought them the most happiness. I didn't just love them, I worshipped them. They viewed money like they viewed alcohol. A little bit was great, but getting addicted to either was dangerous to your soul. Their idea of a really exciting time was a backyard barbecue with their coworkers, with my uncle wearing a ridiculous chef's hat as he tended to the grill and my aunt having us all sing along as she played folk songs on her guitar. Their guests rarely had as much money as my aunt and uncle, but lived in mansions with yachts and private jets with their third trophy spouses. As I got to know them, I understood that my aunt was right. These people were no happier than my family, and some were actually miserable. I remember one adorable girl, Missy, who was 5 years younger than I was. When we were alone, she cried about her third and newest trophy stepmom, who hated her. Hearing that broke my heart. I was 17 and about to leave for college. She was 12. She was much too young to date. I pulled my aunt aside and told her about Missy. She hugged and tried to comfort the young girl as Missy cried in her arms. I left for college and Missy and my aunt became close. My aunt taught Missy to play guitar. Missy missed her bio mom. My aunt missed me and they comforted each other. I graduated Stanford with a major in finance. I became a stockbroker with just my aunt and uncle as clients. I was still the top broker in my company. My aunt wanted me to date Missy, but I couldn't date a girl still in high school without going to prison. My secretary, Shirley, and I fell in love and married. We were both 22. My uncle loved her. My aunt insisted that she sign a prenup. Have I mentioned that my aunt was a little smarter and more cynical than my uncle? We honeymooned for 2 weeks in Hawaii. Neither of us had ever been there before. We had a great time both in and out of bed. The more time was spent in bed. Shirley came from a poor family and enjoyed the financially good life we were living, much more than I did. I just took it for granted. My brokerage practice expanded with my uncle's fellow employees as clients. I was pretty good at investing their money. I was working long hours researching various investments for them. I loved driving to work and home with my wife each day, though sometimes I had to work late and she left without me. Stan, a fellow broker, would sometimes drive Shirley home. Stan and his wife Ethel were good friends of ours. Stan taught Shirley and me to scuba dive. Shirley and I came to love it so much that we bought a used 42-foot Sea Ray, which I docked at a ritzy yacht club in Marina del Rey. We would spend the weekend at the dock on the boat and then go out scuba diving. The boat was big enough that Stan and Ethel would often sleep over in the second cabin too. It was our vacation home. Many times, I took out the boat with Shirley or alone. I'm not naive and always kept an eye on my wife looking for any signs of infidelity. She never gave me a reason to doubt her, but I do have a little paranoia, I guess. My aunt and uncle died within 2 months of each other, and while I was still in mourning, my wife became distant from me. I didn't notice right away because I was too consumed by my grief. I wasn't playing with a full deck for months after their deaths. When I drove in their old neighborhood, I would absently-mindedly look to see if they were walking on the street or driving by. Then I'd come back to reality, remembering that they were dead, and I'd cry. I missed them so much. Shirley understood how much money I had inherited and wanted to immediately start wasting it on luxury cars, diamonds, a mansion, and extravagant travel. We argued because that wasn't how I was raised. She thought money could buy happiness. I knew better. One night at home, I wanted to call a friend. I tried to hit the directory button on the phone, but hit redial instead by mistake. I was shocked to discover that I had unwittingly dialed a law firm. I quickly hung up and researched them on Google. They were a firm specializing in divorce. I ran into the bathroom and vomited on the floor before I reached the toilet. After drinking a ton of ginger ale to settle my stomach, I sat down listening to a recording of my late aunt singing folk songs to calm me down and tried to come up with a plan. I had suspicions, but no proof. I drove to Best Buy and bought several voice-activated recorders. I placed them near telephones around the house and another under Shirley's car's driver's seat. Since the Apple tracking device notified people of their presence, they would do me no good. Instead, I bought another Apple iPhone and an external battery pack. I shut off the sound and notifications. I turned on the Find My app and placed it in my wife's trunk, under the spare tire. I would now be able to track my wife's car in real time. I was still hoping that my wife had dialed a wrong number and had no intention of speaking to a divorce lawyer. Of course, I still believed that my uncle's favorite teams, the Philadelphia Phillies, would win this year's pennant race, while the Eagles would win the Super Bowl in the same year, which tells you how removed I was from reality. The next day, my hopes and dreams were destroyed by tracking her location. I discovered that she and Stan met up in a motel. I listened to the tape recorder hidden in my wife's car and learned that she was on her way to the motel. She told Stan that according to her lawyers, she would be entitled to half of our rather modest savings, but receive none of my inheritance in a divorce. This infuriated her. If I died, however, she explained to Stan, she would inherit it all. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, and Stan soon joined in on the homicidal dream. To give the devils their due, they came up with an ingenious plan. Stan would buy a small handheld electric sea scooter. Then he, his scuba gear, and the scooter would be hidden on the boat the next time I took it out alone. When we were miles out to sea, he would emerge from his hiding place, shoot me with a taser, throw me overboard to drown, leave the back gate to the swim step open as he used the scooter and scuba gear to return to shore undetected. Many sailors drown while trying to take a leak from the back of the boat. They are found with their pants down. Stan planned to leave me in that condition in case the Coast Guard found my body, leaving the boat seemingly abandoned. When the Coast Guard eventually found the abandoned boat, they would assume I fell overboard and drowned. Then Stan referenced the movie The Godfather, like Luca Brasi, your husband will soon sleep with the fish, and they both laughed. I thought it was a great plan. Clearly these two were not stupid, just evil. I was filled with a rage I hadn't felt since Eric beat me up and Susan laughed at me. With those memories and that hatred burning through my soul, I made up my mind on what I had to do. All week, I told my wife how excited I was to take out the boat this weekend. I asked if she wanted to come, but hiding a smile, she declined. Saturday morning at 9, I put my newly purchased safety gear in my pockets and pulled my boat out of the yacht club. I turned on the autopilot, hid behind the captain's bench out of sight. I listened and waited. About a half hour later, when we were about 10 miles out to sea, the cabin hatch opened. From my hiding place, I could see Stan, wearing a wetsuit and weight belt, with a taser in his hand. He looked around puzzled because he didn't see me behind the wheel. I jumped up from my hiding place with my safety gear and fired at him with one of the 2 tasers I had bought for cash that week. It failed to work. I didn't hesitate a moment and shot him with my second taser. I had been a Boy Scout and was always prepared. I bought the tasers far away from where I lived and wore a wig as part of my disguise so no one knew I owned them. I didn't use a gun because I didn't want blood on my boat. That evidence could send me to prison. He dropped his taser as he fell onto the floor of the cockpit cabin writhing in pain. I kicked his taser away from him and fired my taser at him 2 more times. I must have a sadistic streak because I felt real joy when I heard his screams. It reminded me of the time I beat up Eric. I dragged him to the stern and pushed him overboard before he could recover from the taser shots. With the weight belt on, he quickly sank. A mile away, I threw all 3 tasers, the sea scooter, and scuba equipment overboard. Back at the marina, I wiped away fingerprints from any place on the boat he might have left them. I spoke to several people whose boats were near mine and shared a few beers. I was calm and happy. If the police interviewed them about me, I would seem innocent. I am almost ashamed to admit that I felt no guilt or remorse. I didn't call the police earlier because I had insufficient proof of their plan. I remembered that the police did nothing after Eric beat me up. I had learned that calling the police would be a waste of time. It was a kill or be killed world. Perhaps I shouldn't have gone out on the boat that day, but since they had informed me of the time and place of their plan to kill me, I refused to give them another opportunity when I wouldn't be on my guard. As for the judicial system, I would only be guilty of first-degree murder if I was caught. I silently entered my home that evening. My wife was watching TV. She had an almost empty bottle of expensive wine next to her. She had a wine glass in one hand and her cell phone in her other hand, waiting for a call from Stan, I assumed. Surprise! I yelled as I walked into the room. She looked up at me, screamed, dropped the wine glass and phone, then fainted. When she came to, I played dumb. I put a cold, wet washcloth on her forehead and said all the things a loving, caring husband would be expected to say. Of course, I didn't say a word about what had happened. My wife just looked strangely at me all evening. Late that night, Stan's wife called and asked if either of us had seen him that day. We both told her we hadn't. Apparently, Shirley and Stan had been very discreet, because no one knew they were having an affair and the police never questioned either of us. I stopped eating anything my wife prepared because I was afraid she'd poison me. I spent most of my time away from her on alleged business trips. I never told her where I was going or when I'd be back, despite how often she asked. I did that for my safety so she couldn't plan another ambush, and it had the added benefit of driving her crazy. Of course, I rewrote my will, leaving her only $10,000 if she didn't contest my will. I never even thought of hurting my wife. I still loved her. I know, I live in a dreamland. Remember, I'm still a Phillies and Eagles fan like my uncle. A month later, I filed for divorce. I own nothing. Our house, the boat, and cars were all owned by the trust set up by my aunt and uncle. So Shirley would get nothing. Even though I was not legally obligated, I offered her $100,000 if she immediately got out of my house, didn't contest the divorce, and waived alimony. Her lawyer negotiated me up to $250,000, and I walked away a free man. I felt bad for Stan's innocent wife. I paid her an extravagant $100,000 for Stan's client list. She was grateful and I felt good about it. We never dated, though in truth I was attracted to her, but I couldn't date the widow of a man I'd killed. My aunt and uncle would have been ashamed of me if I did. I sold the boat after the divorce. It held memories that I needed to forget. Shirley still hung around the yacht club dining room. Eventually, she started dating a mere millionaire, which was quite a step down from me financially. Someone sent him an anonymous letter warning him to make sure she received nothing in his will or he might be in danger. Shortly after that, they broke up. One night at a yacht club dance, Shirley came over and pulled me onto the dance floor against my will. She looked beautiful and was wearing a skin-tight dress. The dress was so tight that when I put my right hand on her back, I could feel the tiny tape recorder hidden there. She said that she knew I killed Stan. I faked surprise, told her she was insane, and walked away. I never again saw her. 2 years later, I attended the funeral of one of my uncle's friends and coworkers. Missy was also there. I had last seen her 2 years ago at her dad's funeral, but she was understandably too upset to say more than hello. Now the 5-year difference in our ages was irrelevant. She had almost as much money as I did, so I wasn't afraid she'd murder me, which unfortunately was an enormous fear from which I still suffered. We went out for coffee after the funeral and dinner 3 nights later, and then every night after that. She told me how impressed she had been that my family didn't let all that money go to their heads and change them. The money had destroyed her family and put a target on her back for every gold digger in town. She'd had her heart broken more than once by guys who thought they had hit the jackpot with her and viewed her only as a lifelong meal ticket. The next month, I took her out on my new boat for the weekend and asked her to marry me. When you know it's right, you know. 10 years later, on an average Sunday morning, we cuddled together in an overcrowded bed with our 2 children and one spoiled, overindulged golden retriever, Cooper, who insists on sleeping in the middle of the bed so he can lick any face that comes close to him. Dear listeners, we have a special shout-out for the incredibly talented Ronald Burns. This story is one of his amazing creations. Please share your thoughts in the comments section. If you enjoyed Ronald's story, be sure to explore more of his literature on Amazon. We've added links to his work in the description box below, so you can easily dive into his captivating storytelling. The day started out as a hectic one when the alarm clock failed to wake me and my wife. It seems there was a power outage during the night, and we had to rush to make it to work on time. Well, she had to rush as I didn't have to be at work until 9 a.m., and it was only a 15-minute drive for me. My wife likes to check her email in the morning before she leaves for work, but was in such a hurry, she forgot to shut down her computer. So when I was about to turn it off, I saw an email that she had gotten a few days ago that the subject line read, "Aloha to a great time." Needless to say, I opened it and was immediately crushed to find out my wife was planning to fly off to Hawaii with another guy while I would be on a 2-week business trip. This was a kick to my gut and a knee to my balls. Now let me give you some background. My wife, Kathy, and I met through some mutual friends over 12 years ago who thought we'd be a good match. As it turned out, we were both into fitness and a healthy lifestyle. She was a yoga instructor and personal trainer, while I worked in the marketing business for a mid-sized company with dreams of becoming bigger. I love the outdoors, so any chance I get you'll find me hiking, mountain biking, running, or any number of other things involving the outdoors. We shared many other interests and we looked good together. Kathy stands 5 feet 6 inches with long flowing brown hair, brown eyes, and of course a killer body. I'm 6 feet 3 inches with blonde hair, blue eyes, and an athletic build. Was it love at first sight? No, but we grew to be good friends, and later the romance began slowly. It took a couple of years, but we did marry, and I thought we were happy for the last 8. I knew I was, but after reading this email, I knew our marriage was in serious trouble. It seems this guy, Gary, and she had been planning this romantic getaway for some time now. She knew of my upcoming business trip as it was a huge opportunity for me and the company. I was going to be away for 2 weeks with a few associates to try and land several big accounts. If I could make this happen, it would mean a promotion and nice bump up in pay. But now as I stared at this email, that was the last thing on my mind. I started to go through her other emails and see what I could find out about this Gary. It seemed she had saved all her emails from him in a folder called Trips. How convenient for me. You see, Kathy isn't a computer savvy, but I use computers on a daily basis, so I knew my way around. It became very clear she had been seeing this a-hole for the last 6 months. But why? I couldn't think of any obvious sign that she was unhappy. Our sex life was great and we enjoyed each other's company. What pushed her into the arms and bed of another man? My head was spinning and I needed to get to work. But before I left, I copied all the saved emails to a thumb drive so I could read them later and try to gather more information on Gary and maybe even get some insight as to why she was doing this. Finally shutting off her computer, I rushed off to work. My thoughts were all about her and this Gary. As I was getting over the shock of this discovery, my anger started to build and I wanted revenge on an epic scale. Now I am not a violent man, nor do I believe in revenge, but this was different. This infidelity on her part was not something I could forgive. I began to wonder where and when this all started, but quickly decided I didn't need to know. What I did want to know was more about Gary and what I could do to ruin his life. I didn't want him dead or seriously injured, although those thoughts did appeal to me. No, I wanted them both to suffer was a very public humiliation. But what and how still needed to be worked out. I had 6 weeks to figure something out, so when I got to work, I shut the door to my office and brainstormed. What I needed was more information, not only on Gary but the details of their trip as well. Then an idea started to form as to how I could ruin their trip before they even left the ground and expose their affair in such a way she would not be able to deny it. It was a risky plan, but it would make her pay in the end. As the day went on, I did do some actual work, but also kept thinking about my plan. When it was time to head home, I stayed in my office for over an hour listing out what I needed and how to go about getting those items. I also made a list of the dangers involved in what I was planning. If this backfired or it was discovered I had a hand in any of this, it could mean jail time for me. But I felt that risk was worth it. Now to gather more information on Gary, I needed access to Kathy's email and computer, so I went online to see if I could download software to get her passwords to her computer and email account, but then stopped. If this was going to work, I couldn't leave a paper trail or electronic one either. You see, if there were to be any type of investigation, I didn't want anyone to find out I was involved. So, with that in mind, I had to figure out how to get what I needed in such a way that it could not be traced back to me. Over the next few days, I purchased a few throwaway cell phones from different stores 30 miles or more outside of town, all with cash, along with a small laptop that I could use at places that offered free Wi-Fi, so my activities couldn't be linked to work or home. I also bought a few wireless video cameras and some bugs to place around the house in the hope that she brings this a-hole into our bed for some extramarital fun. That thought made my blood run cold, but they might just talk about their upcoming trip and provide me with the much-needed information that I needed to make my plan work. As time passed, I tried to act as normal as possible around my wife so she would not suspect me of being onto her affair. That was hard, but over the next few weeks it became so natural to look at her and smile a loving smile while I thought of her screwing that another guy. I think I missed my calling and should have been an actor. During that time, I reached out to some old friends using one of the phones I bought, so there could be no possible link made to me or the persons I was calling. My first call was to a college friend whom I had not spoken to since graduating over 14 years ago. Steve was a party animal back in the day and had been the go-to guy if you were in need of something to liven up the evening. "Steve, it's Hank. How you've been, man?" At first, Steve didn't remember, but after some reminders of those parties in college, it finally clicks. "Hey, Hank. Yeah, now I remember. Boy, those were the days, my friend. What have you been up to?" I gave him a very brief rundown of my life after college. He in turn told me things hadn't turned out as he had hoped, but was doing okay. "So, what do I owe the pleasure of your call?" It wasn't just to reminisce about the good old days. I had to be careful on how to approach the subject, so I wanted to meet him in person. "Look, I need some help and was hoping you might be able to provide it. I was thinking we could meet for lunch and talk about it. What do you say?" He hesitated for a moment. "Yeah, sure, anything for an old college buddy." We made plans to meet at a place far from my workplace, but close to his in a few days. I was really hoping he could help me as time was starting to run down, and I didn't know of anyone else who I could ask. I had also placed the cameras and bugs in the bedroom and living room, thinking those were the two most likely places they would talk and do other things. So, it had been the first week they were in place, and when I checked it showed me nothing. I thought that maybe she was going to his place, as it might be too risky to come back here for their sex fest. But the following week was a different story. It seems she brought Gary back to our place late one morning, and they screwed in every position imaginable for just over 2 hours. It made me sick to watch it, but I had to see if they talked about their trip or gave up any more useful information, but nothing. The following week, I checked the cameras again and found that they had returned, but not for sex, as they just talked about their upcoming trip, which gave me the information I was looking for, their flight number and departure time. As I listened, I could hear the excitement in my wife's voice as they talked about what they had planned. I was more than beyond furious, and I even know about killing the two of them, but dismissed that thought. I wanted them both to live a long and miserable existence. This revenge was going to last a lifetime and follow them to their graves. I had a dream that when my soon-to-be ex-wife was laying on her deathbed old and gray, I would walk in and smile, then lean over and tell her how I had ruined her trip to Hawaii. I would stand up, smile down at her as she looked at me in shock, and then turn around and leave. I was now more determined than ever to make this work, but there was still one thing that I needed to do, and that was going to be another risk I'd have to take. I finally found out more about Gary. He and my wife work at the same health club as a personal trainer as well. It seems he has a bad habit of betting other men's wives. Well, that's about to come to a very ugly end. He lives not far from the club in a small condo complex, so I decided to do a little surveillance and took a day off from work, telling my boss I needed to take care of a few personal things before our business trip. I had purchased a digital camera with a powerful zoom and watched his place for a few hours. It wasn't anything special, just a small 2-bedroom complex, and it looked as if his neighbors were gone during the day for work, and there were no security cameras. That was good, for what I had planned for him needed to be done covertly. At the meeting with Steve, I was nervous about what I needed to ask him. This was the biggest risk of my whole plan, but if I could get what I needed, then it would be so worth it. I saw Steve come into the restaurant and waved him over to the table I was sitting at. It was far at the back, and the place was pretty quiet with only a dozen or so customers there having a late lunch. He walked up and greeted me. "Long time no see, bro. So, what do I owe the pleasure of this meeting?" Time had not been kind to Steve. He looked awful, as if he could have been an extra on the show Walking Dead. I wanted to make this quick. If he couldn't help me, then I would need to look somewhere else for what I needed to buy. We started to talk about college and some of the epic parties Steve threw. The man was a party animal back then, but it has since caught up with him. He looked to be at least 15 years older than his real age. I needed to move things along, so I just came out and asked him point blank, "Steve, the reason I asked you here was to see if you, or someone you know, might help get me some party favors for a little private party I'll be throwing." I handed him a list. "Can you help me out? I'll gladly pay you for your time." Steve read the list, first with a look of shock, but then a smile came across his face. "Sure man, no problem. Sounds like it's going to be an awesome party, dude. Think you could invite an old college buddy along?" I smiled in relief. "Sure, no problem. Just get me what I asked for, and I'll let you know where and when the party will be." "Okay, cool, but I'm going to need some cash up front to get these items for you." I was prepared and handed him an envelope with several $1,000s in it. "Will this do?" "Man, you are planning a major blowout, aren't you? This is more than enough. When do you need this stuff?" I told him to meet me next week with the items, and that if there was a problem or a delay to call me. I then gave him the number to my new cell phone, and we left the restaurant soon after. It was now 2 weeks before my trip, and my wife and her lover were planning on flying out the following day after I left on my trip, so timing was crucial. I had met with Steve, and he was able to get me everything I had asked for. Now all I had to do was to place these items so they wouldn't be found until the time was right. 3 days before my trip, I went home early and checked my wife's suitcase. It was packed and ready to go for her trip, the cheating witch. So I very carefully went into it and placed a few little surprises as a going-away gift. I made sure to hide them, so if she were to unpack and then repack, she would never find them. She wasn't the one I wanted to find them anyway. Next came another risky venture, which involved breaking into Gary's place. I knew his work schedule, so that wasn't an issue. What was the issue was that I had never done anything like this before. I was able to purchase a lockpick set and a book on how to pick a lock. The things you can buy on the internet. I had practiced on several locks at home and at work. I had gotten pretty good at it, so I had great hopes this part of the plan would work. It was early afternoon, so I told my boss I needed to take a long lunch. Soon I found myself outside Gary's condo with my pick set in hand. I surprised myself as I was able to pick the lock in just over a minute and was inside his home. Speed was the key. I wanted to do what I came to do as quickly as possible and leave without a trace. I wore latex gloves and went straight to his bedroom, where I found his packed bag ready for a trip. As I had done with my wife's suitcase, I went through his and placed a few travel gifts that would certainly make this a memorable trip. Once finished, I then moved to the kitchen and found a can of coffee. I then pulled out a mixing bowl from one of his cupboards and emptied the coffee from the can into it. I then placed a few packets in the bottom of the can and filled it back up with the coffee and placed it back where I found it. Making sure all was back where it belonged, I left Gary's place and headed home. I had just one more thing to do. It was a couple of days before my trip, and I reached out to a friend of mine who I knew had a cousin that worked at the airport with the TSA. I also had all the information on the flight my wife and Gary were to take. It was now just a matter to get the information into the right hands, but not to let anyone know where it came from. So, I reached out to my friend, but had to be somewhat cryptic about how I came across this information. "Jack, I need to ask a favor, but you have to keep this information about who gave it to you got it a secret." I gave him details of the flight and Gary's name, but not my wife's. Jack said he would tell his cousin, and that he would handle it from there. I also removed all the cameras and bugs and disposed of them in a way so no one could find them. I also hid a few surprises in Kathy's car just to add to her woes. Now it was the day before my trip, and I thought I'd have a little fun at my wife's expense. As I came home from work, I walked in the house and sat down acting upset. My wife looked at, "What's wrong?" "Something happened at work." "Oh, something happened all right. The clients we were supposed to meet just canceled the meetings. So now I won't be going on that trip, and the company won't get the opportunity to grow," I said with mock anger. I saw the shock and fear on her face. It was then I knew she was thinking of a way to get me to go on that trip so she and Gary could have their fun in Hawaii. Can't they send you anyway and trying to work things out with those clients? I mean, you and your team have spent a lot of time and energy on this project. It seems such a shame to waste all of that hard work. This pissed me off to no end about how she could talk about shame. She had no shame, and she and Gary were going to pay. I looked at her and laughed. "Just pulling your leg, honey. The trip is still on, don't worry." There was a sign of great relief on her face, and then she smiled. "You had me going there for a second. So you all packed?" "Yeah, just need to add a few items to my carry-on and I'll be ready to go. Hope you won't miss me too much while I'm gone. Do you have anything planned? Maybe a girls' night out or something?" "No, nothing. I'll be sitting here just waiting for my loving husband to return." God, I almost laughed at that, but I was too angry. The next day, my wife drove me to the airport and dropped me off. I gave her a long, passionate kiss while my hands rubbed that sweet tight bum of hers. It would be the last kiss I would ever give her, so I wanted it to be a memorable one. I met up with the rest of the group, and we boarded the flight. It was uneventful, and once when we landed and had checked in at the hotel, I called the house, but I used the phone from the hotel room. There was no answer, so I left a message. "Honey, I did a really stupid thing. I left my phone in the cab and won't be able to call you until I get it returned or replaced, so if you need to call me, leave a message at the front desk, and I'll be sure to call you later in the evening." I didn't forget my phone. I just wanted to have a valid excuse for not taking her calls. So, the next day came, and I made sure my phone was off and that no one could reach me while I was in meetings all day with clients. When I got back to the room, I checked but hadn't received any messages, so I turned on my phone and didn't find any messages from my wife or anyone else. Well, maybe they did get through security at the airport. The next day, the meetings went even better than the first ones, and we were back at the hotel early. There were several messages waiting for me on the phone in my hotel room. One was from my wife, another was from her father, and the third was from a DEA agent, which brought a smile to my face. I then checked my cell phone and saw several messages waiting for me. I played the messages from the hotel phone. The first was from my wife, and she was crying. "Baby, it's me. I'm in big trouble and I really need you. Please come home now. Please." After that, all I heard was crying. The next message was from me soon-to-be ex-father-in-law. "Hank, your wife has been trying to get in touch with you. She's been arrested and needs you home now. Please call me when you can." The last message was from a DEA agent. "Sir, this is Agent DeFranco, and I would like to speak with about your wife and her arrest on drug charges." He went on about where to reach him and a few other details. I was so happy I couldn't stop smiling, but had to put on a serious face for my coworkers. This had worked out perfectly so far, but I still needed to act surprised and shocked so no one would suspect I had anything to do with this. So, I contacted my boss the following morning and told him I had a serious problem at home, but didn't give out any details. He said that since the meetings were going so well, I could leave to take care of this emergency, but he wanted me back as soon as possible to ensure that we closed the deals with these clients. I caught the first plane back home, and as soon as I was on the ground, I pulled out my lost cell phone and called my father-in-law. "What in hell is going on? I got your message, but don't believe it. Kathy was arrested on drug charges? She doesn't do drugs. Where did this happen? At the health club?" I knew exactly where it took place. "No, She was traveling with a friend to Hawaii and was stopped at security where they found some illegal drugs on her and her friend. Her father said in a low voice as if embarrassed, "Wait a minute, just wait." She told me she was going to be home, that she didn't have any plans. Who was this friend she was going to Hawaii with? I bet one of her girlfriends told her into going and got her into all this mess. Her father hesitated a moment. I know it was with someone else. The important thing to remember here, Hank, is that she is in trouble and needs our help. She loves you, and I know you love her, so. I cut him off. What aren't you telling, Dad? Who was she traveling with? I yelled into the phone. I was enjoying this a little too much. There was silence, then he cleared his throat. She was traveling with a man, Gary somebody. He has been arrested but. Again, I cut him off. So, you're telling my wife, your daughter, was flying off to Hawaii with another man while I was out busting my bum to earn a living, and she gets busted for drug possession? Is that what you're telling me? Yes, I'm afraid it is what I'm telling you. I took a long pause. Okay, I need to talk to her lawyer, then this DEA agent, and then I'm going to talk to her. After that, we'll go from there, but she better have one hell of an explanation as to why she was about to go to Hawaii with another man and taking drugs with her as well. I hung up on him before he could respond. When I got home, I saw there were over 20 messages waiting, so I began to play them back. The first, as expected, was from me about losing my cell phone. The next few were from Kathy hoping I would check our messages while I was on my business trip. Several were from her father, and the rest from her lawyer asking me to get in touch as soon as possible. I called the lawyer, and since he wasn't in the office at that time, I made an appointment for the following morning. Next, I called the DEA agent DeFranco and agreed to meet him at his office downtown later that afternoon. I quickly got cleaned up and headed off, all the while trying to think if I had covered my tracks so none of this could come back on me. Soon I found myself in what I can only assume was an interrogation room. Agent DeFranco walked in carrying a folder. "Glad you were able to stop by and see me. I have some questions about your wife that I was hoping you could answer." He said this while reading something from the folder. "Look, my wife isn't into drugs. As long as I've known her, she has never taken anything illegal. Hell, she doesn't even drink that much. This must be all a big misunderstanding or mistake. She's a yoga instructor, for God's sake. Why would she be doing drugs?" I was putting on a little act, but Agent DeFranco never looked up. People do all sorts of stupid things for all sorts of stupid reasons. "Now, did you know your wife was going to Hawaii with this guy, Gary? She told us he was just a friend, but Gary said they were going to have a romantic holiday. So, do you know this, Gary? Did you know your wife was having an affair? Did you know anything about the drugs?" Now he was looking at me, hard. I took a deep breath to calm myself. I didn't know any of it until I talked with my father-in-law this morning. But I still can't believe it. She must have been coerced into doing this. She is just too good a person to be involved in anything like this. I didn't want to overplay this. I'm sure this guy could spot someone lying in a heartbeat, so I had to be very careful. He sighed. "No, I guess you didn't know. Well, I hate to break it to you, chum, but your wife was cheating on you with a drug dealer, no less. Now we've already searched his place and found even more drugs, and soon we'll be searching your home as well. Now you could cooperate and let us into your house, or it wouldn't take long to get a search warrant. Either way, we'll be there soon to do the search." I knew her lawyer would have said not to, but this was self-preservation, and it would look good that I was not trying to hide anything. So, I agreed and soon found myself back at the house with dozens of DEA and FBI agents and a couple of their dogs looking through my house. They did take a few things, some pill containers she kept in the medicine cabinet. The next day, while I met with Kathy's lawyer, I told him of my meeting with DeFranco and of the search. He was not happy. "If you have any more contact with any law enforcement official, I want to be there before you answer any questions. Do you understand?" I nodded. I was pissed. "Now let me make something clear to you. I want to know everything that has happened that led to my wife being arrested. So far, all I know is that she was about to board a flight to Hawaii with this guy Gary, and if you or she wants my help, somebody better tell me how this came to be. Do I make myself clear? You know I can't discuss your wife's case with you." At that point, I walked out. Next, I went to the jail where she was being held and asked to see her. I met her in a room with several other inmates who were meeting either with family or lawyers at round metal tables with stools around them bolted to the floor. I saw her being led and wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, no makeup, and her hair was pulled back into a tight but messy ponytail. She looked like shit, as if she hadn't slept in the last few days. "Oh, baby, I'm so glad you're here," she cried. I was about to give her a hug when a guard came over and told us we could have no physical contact. This made her cry even more. "It's okay, baby, we'll get this whole mess sorted out. What I need now is to hear your side of the story. How did you end up about to fly off to Hawaii with this guy? I said this with no emotion whatsoever. She started to cry even more. Hank, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So, it is true. You were having an affair with this guy, Gary, this drug dealer. How could you? Weren't you happy with me? Don't you love me? I don't understand this. I mean, you and him. Then there are the drugs. What were you thinking? I waited, but I knew she didn't have an answer. Please believe me when I say I've always loved you. This was just a one-time thing. It didn't mean anything to me. Can you please find it in your heart to forgive me? She was pleading with me now. I looked at her for a long moment, then said, I might have found it in my heart to forgive you, but you shattered it into a million pieces and therefore I have no forgiveness for you. When I leave here, I'll be talking to a divorce lawyer and all the locks will have been changed on the house. I'll have all your clothes and other belongings sent to your parents' place because I want all traces of you removed from my house. As of now, you are no longer part of my life. I want nothing more to do with you. Oh, and tell that lawyer of yours that he better not use me as a character witness because I'll have nothing good to say about you. Goodbye, Kathy. I hope things work out for you. She was crying her eyes out and begging me not to go, that she needed me. I never turned around but just went straight home and started to pack up her shit. I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed the following day. Then I called a security company and arranged to have them come by next week and install their top-of-the-line system for me. Within a few days, I had most of her stuff packed and ready to be sent to her parents' house. I'd also received, and ignored, several calls from Kathy wanting to talk. As far as I was concerned, she could go to hell. Finally, I was able to return to work and we were able to sign those big clients we had been pursuing. Soon I had my promotion and the pay raise that came with it. I was able to divorce Kathy with little trouble as it was a straight-up 50-50 split with no alimony and with her footing the bill for her legal fees from her drug arrest. She kept trying to get in touch with me, but I wanted to put some distance between us. Now she never went to trial as the evidence was so overwhelming that her lawyer said she couldn't win. It was in her best interest to take a plea deal and get a shorter sentence. She was not happy, to say the least. Gary, on the other, had fought tooth and nail to try and prove his innocence. Dumb bastard was sent up for 15 years, whereas Kathy only got 5 years. It was the day of Kathy's sentencing, and she had asked to see me one last time before she started serving her sentence. I agreed, and we met at her lawyer's office an hour before she was due in court. She looked at me, and I could see she had been crying. Hank, I just wanted you to know that Gary didn't mean a thing to me. It was you I loved and always will love. I'm so sorry I hurt you like this. It was never meant to be this way. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday. She was on the verge of tears again. Kathy, I want to know one thing. Why? Were you bored? Did I disappoint you in bed? Was it the thrill of doing something wrong and getting away with it? What made you do this and destroy our marriage? I said sadly. She looked at me. I don't really know why. I guess it was the excitement of doing something wrong, but I always loved you. Apparently you didn't love me enough, or you would have never done this in the first place. Kathy, I hope this will be the last time that I ever have to deal with you, but I never want to see or hear from you again. I also want you to spend your time in prison thinking just how much you've lost, all because you wanted a little excitement in your life. I'm guessing you're going to have some exciting times behind bars once those ladies see your tight little bum. She started to cry again, but this time out of fear. Over the next few years, the company grew, and I worked my way up to a VP position. The business expanded, and we now had an office in New York, and I was chosen to head up. This meant selling my house, moving to Manhattan, and getting an apartment. Early on, I had received a few letters from Kathy, but sent them back unopened. That was a part of my life I wanted to put behind me and move on. It has been 7 years now, and my life in New York was good. I was still single and dating a different woman every few months. I had no desire to get married and put myself at risk of being betrayed again. Once was enough. I was sitting in my office when a call from the lobby came in, and my administrative assistant Amy came in. There is a woman downstairs wanting to speak to you. She says her name is Kathy. I pause for a moment, have her shown up, but have 2 security guards standing by. Also, I have something I want you to do for me. I wrote something down and handed to Amy. Call me a few minutes after you show her in. She looked at what I had written and smiled at it. A few minutes later, Kathy was in my office, but she looked at least 10 years older and had put on some weight, but not in a good way. Her once beautiful long brown hair was now showing some gray and was frayed. I could see the bags under her eyes, which were sad-looking. The clothes she wore were stylish but conservative and a bit dated. I looked at her but felt nothing. Not love, not hate, not even pity. I was just empty of emotion. So, Kathy, what do you want? Hank, I was hoping to talk to you. I felt the need to set the record straight as to what happened to me. You see, I had no idea about the drugs, and I still don't know how they got in my bags. Gary must have snuck them in when I wasn't looking. I'm not a drug user and never have been. Please believe me. She was pleading. Kathy, you threw away our marriage for a fling and made our whole marriage a lie. Why should I believe you now? Why is it so important that you felt the need to track me down and tell me another lie? You don't understand. I love you. I still love you. I want you back. I want us to be together again. I want us to. Just then the phone on my desk rang and I put it on speaker. Yes, Amy. What is it? Stacy called to confirm that you should get 4 tickets for the opening as her parents are coming into town and they want to meet you. Let her know that I'll buy 4 tickets. Oh, and find out where her parents are staying. I'd like to send her mother a dozen roses. I ended the call and turned back to Kathy. You were saying? Kathy was on the verge of tears. Who is Stacy? Oh, just some woman I've been dating for a while, but you're not here to discuss my love life. You were telling me you still love me. I'm flattered, but you should know I do not love you anymore. That ended the day your father told me you were arrested and that you were about to fly off to Hawaii with Gary. As soon as your infidelity was exposed, I was done with you. Now please leave, and I never want to see you again. Do you understand me? I looked hard at her, but I didn't have anything to do with those drugs they found. I was set up. Gary must have. I slammed my hand down on my desk. Kathy, enough with your lies. You were screwing around on me. You lied to me then, and you're lying to me now. Just stop it. I don't believe you, and I never will. I think it's time you left, and please don't come back. I've instructed security that if you ever show up here again to have you arrested. Do I make myself clear? She was silently crying but nodded her head. I led her to the door and had the 2 security guards escort her out of the building. Amy came in after she left. What was that all about? Oh, that was just me saying aloha to a great time. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.